Hi there, and we are the Movie Meisters. My name is Kenneth,
And I'm Matt.
and we just saw both sequels to Blade Runner. Matt, explain what I'm talking about.
Right, so there's this movie called Soldier that has the Tannhauser Gate as a guest star in it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So the original Blade Runner was written by Hampton Fancher and David Webb Peoples. They each kind of split off and each did a sequel. Soldier was written like right after the original Blade Runner, but I don't know, the script was in development hell, and then eventually it got made in like 1998 or something. This isn't going to be a compare and contrast, so why don't we start with Soldier? So Matt, what is Soldier about?
Soldier is about a super soldier raised from birth in a 1984 dystopia that is connected to the Blade Runner universe. And he is psychologically programmed like Pavlov's dog to be an ultimate killing machine who follows orders. But then he gets replaced by someone who's been genetically programmed to be the perfect super soldier. And so they just dump him on a waste planet full of trash, Mad Max style. And he runs into Mad Max style, or actually kind of Waterworld style.
Yeah, I think that's closer, yeah.
Group of people who live off of the garbage. And then, surprise, surprise, the first mission of the super genetically trained soldiers is to go to that very place and kill all the people there. So he needs to discover his humanity and fight back.
Yeah, I kind of view this movie as like Dances with Wolves or Last Samurai, but done well, or at least that plot done in a more reasonable way.
I mean, within the parameters of what I expected to be, I thought it was pretty good. That being said, it's just incredibly melodramatic and cheesy, like nobody's business.
Oh yeah, totally. I should mention David Webb Peoples, who wrote the original Blade Runner. I like a lot of the things that he's done. He wrote the movie Unforgiven with Clint Eastwood, which is one of the few westerns to ever win Best Picture, ironically alongside Dances with Wolves. But that's a whole. I'm going off topic. If you didn't pick up on the Tannhauser Gate reference, or you didn't see the spinner from the original movie, chances are you're not going to realize that this is connected to Blade Runner in any way. Thematically, there are similarities, though, because it involves using a group of people who are seen as less than human and manipulating them to do your will. What I like most about this movie, well, is the main character, that there are details about him being a soldier, being put into kind of a domestic life, and his inability to adjust. There are some subtle details and some not so subtle. As you mentioned, it's very melodramatic at times.
The most obvious way to connect it to Blade Runner would be to make him a replicant, or to make the genetically engineered people replicants, but I don't think there's any indication of that. It seems like it's an entirely separate method of manufacturing soldiers. And it happens after Blade Runner, presumably,
Right, yeah.
because Tannhauser Gate is in the past in the movie, and that had to happen during the lifetime of Roy Batty, and he's only 7 years old, so yeah, I'm not sure. Is this like replicants are banned, I guess, and so they're using this guy instead?
Yeah, I mean, that sort of makes sense. One detail that I kind of thought of was that all of the soldiers have a tattoo on their face, and I thought of that as, well, you got all these people going into battle, maybe some are replicants, some are human soldiers, and the tattoo on their face is a way to differentiate them, I guess. Certain things I like about the movie is, one of the things is development of our main character. So the main character is Todd, played by Kurt Russell, and he's been conditioned to just be a soldier, to only follow orders. He doesn't speak unless spoken to. He's only programmed to kill. He's obsessed with guns. He learns to be more human by interacting with these colonists who live on this waste planet. I like particular details about it. For example, he says less than maybe 100 words in the entire movie, and I like that the movie had the balls to go through with that, because then it's just entirely reliant on his performance and not so much on what's given to him. And I think Kurt Russell does a reasonable job with the material he's given. And his character development is actually pretty subtle. His big moment at the end, really, to show that this character has changed, is that he picks up a kid. And then that's it. It's not like, oh, he's smiling at the end, all of a sudden he's super chatty. No, it's just that he's learned to adapt into this family life. So I like the subtlety of that. Where I think the movie falters, though, so I don't think there are too many problems in the writing. Like I mentioned, I like David Webb Peoples as a writer. I think the main issues come in the directing, because it looks, if you watch Blade Runner and Soldier back to back for some reason, Soldier looks really cheap. I think there's one cinematic shot in the movie where Todd is dumped onto the waste planet, and then he stands up, and then you see this field of just waste all around him, and that's a pretty cinematic shot. But everything else looks really small and really, I don't know, it looks almost like a TV movie set. Even earlier on when they're showing him in the wars, those look pretty cheap. There's one part, I think we were both laughing, when it shows him and a bunch of other soldiers on the moon, and they're just kind of walking, and it looked like a B-movie set, honestly. And I think I want to blame that more on the director. So this movie was directed by Paul W. Sanderson, who's probably best known for the Resident Evil movies. So not the biggest, not exactly someone deserving of high praise. This is probably his first or second best movie. To be fair, it does rise above most of his other stuff because he didn't write this, thankfully. But he does give the movie kind of a cheap look. Most of the vehicles and stuff look pretty good, except for the vehicle carrying the soldiers. That looked very, very 90s CGI. Model-wise, everything else looked okay, but the sets, they looked really cheap looking for some reason.
So I like the high concept idea of this, where human beings are disposable and literal garbage, and there's this great bit about how the garbage truck spaceships are constantly coming by to drop garbage off, and yet the people on the planet never ever get rescued or even noticed, which is interesting. But the way the plot works seems to go against that kind of idea. Like, it seems like the bad guy is just extra evil, and like that's why the whole plot is happening, just because like he's an asshole.
Yeah.
Like, there's even, it seems to be a military tradition of like not leaving people behind, not hurting civilians, whatever, and this kind of sidekick captain character keeps objecting and stuff, and eventually gets himself shot because he doesn't want to do what the evil guy says. But it just seems like this one guy is just so mean and bad that he's causing bad things to happen. But it's like, well, what about this whole system of the garbage constantly being dumped and people not being noticed? Like, shouldn't it be more like a unstoppable social force that just permeates everything? It just seemed weird. It's almost like the typical action movie idea of there's got to be a Snidely Whiplash. He literally has a little mustache.
He does, yes. Yeah, I would agree with that. That is one big issue I had with the movie, was the antagonist is very one-dimensional, and there's nothing to him. He's just like, I'm going to be evil, I'm going to be an asshole, I'm going to kill everybody. It doesn't really matter. I only care about living, just surviving myself, and I'll send in the pawns to do my work. The way it could have worked better for this movie is if you mentioned the garbage trucks, they ignore the humans on the planet. If there was some way to show that society has become like this, maybe he's not the only colonel like this. Maybe all the higher up military people, all the people connected to government are like this. They just don't care. They only care about themselves. And, maybe that would be a better way of doing it.
Riley?
We be issued weapons, sir.
No, Riley. Only soldiers get weapons.
Yes, sir.
You don't even have to salute anymore, Riley.
Another great thing this movie had going for it that kind of didn't work in the end, I think, was the idea of the group of soldiers who are outdated, right? They live throughout the entire movie, right? Their whole life is based around taking orders and being the greatest warrior, etc. There's this tension, though, between like the honor system of being a warrior and then following orders. And it seems to align for them back when they're just carrying out missions. But then once the new soldiers arrive, that they become obsolete and they just, you don't get a weapon because you're not a soldier anymore. So that tension is interesting because on the one hand, they want to just follow orders, but on the other hand, their whole like lifestyle is being destroyed in front of their eyes, right? But then it just doesn't go anywhere because the main character kills all the bad guys.
That's right.
I was just waiting the whole time for him to get the old team back together, and it was going to be like the Bad News Bears versus the super genetically enhanced soldiers, and they were going to use like Captain Guy who gets killed keeps complaining that they're the ones that have the experience, and they have I don't know if they ever explained why this would be, but it also seemed like they had more emotions than the newer soldiers. Newer soldiers seem a little bit more robotic, maybe because they're genetically programmed. And it's like, well, they use their, human intuition and their years of experience to just prove themselves to be the better soldiers, right? And then that would win out over the following orders aspect of their personal identity. And it would be like a little arc for the soldier team. But it didn't happen at all.
It only happened with Todd. Yeah.
They're there the whole time too.
Yeah.
They're right where the action is happening, just standing around doing nothing.
Well, see, another angle I think they could have gone with is, you've got all these people thrown against each other. You got the old soldiers against the new soldiers and so on. And you have Kane, who's sort of the main new soldier, fighting Todd. They're both soldiers. They're both programmed this way. I mean, there could have been a means of making them empathize with each other, something like that. There's more that could have been done with that. That's just the main fault of the movie, is that there's more that could have been done.
Right, it almost seems to be setting that up, because in the beginning, Kane is in a fight to the death, and his eyeball gets ripped out, and he gets yelled at like, this man is now useless because he doesn't have an eye, and then later you find out he gets it replaced with a different eye. But it's like, so he's been on the other end of this. He understands the whole feeling of becoming obsolete. It seems like that would be a way to humanize him and be like, maybe in the end they of course have their giant showdown death battle, but maybe they like sympathize with each other in some way.
It's a dumb action movie that had the potential to be a lot more. Themes that could have been pushed forward to give us a better idea of the society that this film takes place in. But it doesn't follow through with any of these things. For me, the only part that really has any depth or really any interest is the Todd character. He's the only one who grows. He's the only one who changes throughout the movie. All the rest of the characters are kind of thrown to the side or are just stereotypes pretty much. I like how well he was portrayed, with Kurt Russell. He does what a soldier would do when he's eating with the colonists. He's just shoveling food into his mouth because that's something a soldier would do. They eat when they can, they sleep when they can. It's that sort of thing. I like those little details. Everything else around him is not well conveyed or well portrayed or expanded upon the way it should be to make this more than just a dumb shoot-'em-up movie.
17 more, sir.
Oh my God, you can't fight 17 on your own. You'll have to organize us. We're not cowards. We'll do as you tell us. We'll fight.
No.
Why not?
Soldiers deserve soldiers, sir.
The idea that one soldier is going up against guys who have the exact same training as him, maybe not as much experience, but it would have been easier to swallow if maybe he got, as you mentioned, some of the older soldiers to help him, or other ways of doing it. I mean, I like those sequences because he's using like guerrilla warfare type of deal. He's hiding under the water. He's using a soldier's body to make it look like that it's him shooting at the bad guys. Little tricks like that, and I like those details, but there's more that could have been done.
Yeah, and I also think once he gets going, killing people Home Alone style, it just like never stops. It's just clearly he's gonna kill every last motherfucking one of them. I thought too they're gonna bring back the PTSD stuff, because one of the reasons he can't get along with everybody is that he has post-traumatic stress disorder and he freaks out sometimes and attacks people. So once the fighting actually starts going again, like the PTSD doesn't really hinder him from doing all kinds of crazy shit, blowing things up and taking over tanks and stuff. You'd think there'd be some kind of dramatic reversal where it's like, he's setting off his Home Alone traps and then he like freaks out. Someone needs to come to his rescue. Maybe the captain guy who's like semi-sympathetic decides to betray what's-his-face and doesn't just get immediately murdered.
There's so many avenues of potential here, but none were developed on. I would recommend it if you're curious just to see another story in the Blade Runner universe. It's one you can skip if you'd like.
I mean, I don't want to be too hard on him because I thought it was decent, but I would probably just say skip it. To me, it's Waterworld, and I don't know how many post-apocalyptic movies someone really needs to watch in their lifetime to kind of get the point of, just watch like the old Mad Max again, and it'll be fine.
born, not made.
Well, let's move on to the other Blade Runner sequel. We each saw all three shorts leading up to the movie. Do you have any comments on any of those?
The only one that stands out to me is the one where CEO Steve Jobs guy is demoing the new version of the replicants. That one was fine, except for the editing was just terrible. It was like, I don't even know if there's that many camera angles as much as it was that it was cutting every few seconds when nothing was happening. It was just like, can't people stand in a room and have a conversation without just constantly switching where the camera is? It's just so annoying. And I don't know, I guess this was kind of a silly fear because obviously the directors of the shorts are not the same. But I thought that didn't bode well for the final movie, that it was just basically out of control. I did not like it at all.
Yeah, well, that's a good lead into Blade Runner 2049, because you mentioned to me multiple times, well, I'm not looking forward to this new Blade Runner movie. For me, I am a big fan of Denis Villeneuve. He did the movie Arrival and Sicario and Enemy, and I know you probably haven't seen any of those, but they were all very, very well-made movies, so I had hope for this movie.
No, I thought this movie was going to be garbage. I just feel like it seemed impossible to me that it could be good, so I just had low expectations going in.
We're in the age of belated sequels to things, especially things from the 80s now, I'm noticing. Let's get into the movie. So the movie follows this Blade Runner named Agent K, who is hunting down replicants. He discovers a mystery. I'm amazed that they were able to make a worthy follow-up to the first movie, and even in some ways do certain things better, like doubling down on the themes questioning humanity. So let's discuss without spoilers at first, and then we'll get into the spoilers.
This movie is fantastic. It is visually, it's almost alarming how good this movie looks. And it's not just like, ooh, sparkly visual, which it does have, and it looks very good. They have shots that do use CG and yet look as good as all the old great shots from Blade Runner. But that's not the point. The point is the directing is very good, and everything is done very appropriately. And that specifically, there's a lot of parts in this movie where everything except what you're supposed to focus on is obscured with a plausible environmental reason, and you just have to focus on what's going on. And the shots and scenes really are slow and take their time. Things are presented visually in a tasteful way without having a billion goddamn things going on in the background. It's just very, very well done. Someone spent a tremendous amount of time thinking about where the camera was going to be and what it was going to be pointed at. It's just great to see that in a movie.
Agreed 100%. Everything was put together so great in this movie. Going back to the overall theme of Blade Runner sequels, so Soldier was written by David Webb Peoples. This was written by Hampton Fancher, who apparently the way this worked is he wrote a novella, and then he had another writer convert it into a screenplay, and that is ultimately what we see. It should be noted, as you mentioned, it is a very, very slow-paced movie. It allows you to really be immersed in not only the environments, but in the scenes that are happening. I think it's going to be a huge problem for general audiences today who are used to movies having much faster pacing than even back in the 80s. But do you think this is a problem?
I don't know. I mean, when I was watching it, I thought it was delightful. I don't want to speculate on anyone else's taste or lack thereof. I feel like, God, it's so good.
Yeah, it's everything I wanted from a Blade Runner sequel. I mean, it's some things to be concerned about when making a sequel like this, and things that I observed like with Prometheus or Alien Covenant, where even though it's directed by the same director, the visuals look completely different because there's a use of CGI. There's technology that doesn't feel appropriate to the franchise. But here we're getting Atari advertisements and Pan Am advertisements, and neither of those companies are still around, but because they were in the original movie, it makes perfect sense that they would still be in the sequel. But also, it's employing CGI in a way that it visually matches the original, and pacing-wise, and pretty much everything. But I agree, this is a fantastic movie. If you haven't seen it, if you are a sci-fi fan, you should definitely check it out. Now we're going to get into the plot proper and jump into spoilers. The plot is about a discovery that an older model replicant had somehow given birth. And so it's up to Officer K to hunt down this natural birth replicant. And for the sake of his job, he's supposed to kill this individual because we're in a new society now where replicants are looked down upon even more, but they're incorporated into Earth society, but there's almost like a racism against them, and they're used for the menial labor, for the farming, etc., etc. To discover that a replicant could give birth would disrupt this society. That's ultimately the big theme of the movie, and it's constantly asking you, what makes you human? Is it your memories? Is it the ability to give birth? Is it the feeling of emotion, and so on and so forth? And there are different levels of it too. So you have human characters, you have replicant characters, and you have holographic AI people. So I'm talking a lot. Why don't you?
So there's a lot of hints early on in this movie. There's going to be some kind of Jesus stand-in narrative. I think at one point one of the characters says to the main character that he was born and not made, which is, if you've ever been inside of all kinds of Christian churches, that's part of the Nicene Creed, right? Begotten, not made. And then they do a little switcheroo on you, which I thought was really clever, where the Steve Jobs looking character decides that Rachel is like the Rachel from the Bible who gives birth even though she's barren because God wills it, and she gives birth to Joseph, which is the nickname that he gets from his holographic girlfriend early in the movie. And I thought that was just delightful.
Yeah.
Somebody's not just giving me obvious cliches, they're kind of thinking about what really are the mythological analogs here. Not just whatever is most common, but at what actually fits.
Right.
And that was pretty great, but at the same time, you can't really trust what Steve Jobs guy says, because that's not what ends up happening.
Right.
And exploring those themes really works in this movie. The holographic girlfriend, I think, is a great character for this concept, because it seems like from the main character's point of view, she's important to his life, but she has very little impact on the plot. And even when she dies, it's directed in a way where it's like nothing extra happens to the situation, right? She just gets kind of killed by one of the villains. Her death, it's totally in vain. Like, it doesn't have any impact on the plot. Either you could take that as, this is tragic because she's an AI human being, and the fact that her death doesn't affect anything demonstrates how shitty it is to live that way in that kind of society. Or you could take it as the whole time it's just this sort of AI trick of consciousness, and it doesn't affect anything because she never was real in the first place, right? It's just kind of, he's being fooled by this advertisement, basically.
Yeah, they double down on it when they show the advertisement. It's just, oh, look, here's Joy, and then she'll do anything that you want. She'll be whatever you want. And that's the illusion that's lifted off your eyes as the movie progresses, because he thinks that he's the child who was born. Later on, it's because the person who makes the memories happened to give him that memory. And of course, it's revealed that the person who made the memories was the actual child. But we think the whole time, oh, this is Ryan Gosling is the one, and Joy is more than just another advertised AI, because she makes an effort to contact a prostitute to stand in for her as they have sex. She's more than just an artificial creation. She's not just an advertisement, but ultimately we're dealt with the hard truth that, yeah, she is kind of just an advertisement. And by the way, that scene, very similar to one from the movie Her, where the main character falls in love with his operating system voiced by Scarlett Johansson, and she hires a hooker to pretend to be her in the physical form. So I don't know if Denis Villeneuve watched that movie and then but anyway, it worked perfectly. Even visually, the hologram trying to stand where the prostitute is standing, and it's not lining up correctly no matter what they do.
Right, it's a perfect visual metaphor for it not quite being real.
Right.
And it's just the exact opposite in a very good way of what happens in Ghosts, one of our earlier reviews, where Whoopi Goldberg has Patrick Swayze inside of her, and then they just, once the kissing starts, they just sort of insert Patrick Swayze into all the shots, right?
Right.
It's like, oh, but they really know who they are, like the true souls on the inside. This movie's doing like the exact opposite to make it awkward and not perfect and not working, where they sync up, but then you can kind of, and it's not just that you can see the woman's arms moving first or underneath the hologram. They also will do different gestures, like little putting the arms around the head or something. It'll be a little bit more affectionate in the one case and a little more practical in the other cases.
Right.
It's just a very pleasant little visual sequence.
Even at certain points, it's like you see one character's face and the other character's face, and at other points they're merged. You know, like those things online where you merge two people's faces to see what their child would look like or something. And it plays into the themes of the movie perfectly because you're constantly questioning what makes a real person a real person. Of course, that applies to our main character because he knows from the beginning that he's a replicant. And his boss, played by Robin Wright, jokingly tells him, you know, the fact that you don't have a soul makes you perfectly useful, you know, to us. And he doesn't take offense to that. He knows he's a replicant. But as soon as he gets the idea that he might be a natural born person, he completely loses his shit. He just he just yells at the top of his lungs, and it's perfectly appropriate to what this character is going through.
Yeah, and I think it's a nice little twist. I mean, it's not earth-shattering or anything, but it's just nice to have the questioning of reality being, oh, what if my memories are actually real?
Yeah.
Because he believes that they're all fake.
And it's the exact opposite of what Deckard was going through in the first movie, or at least implied to be going through. And that's a good thing to bring up for this movie, Matt. Now that we know that Deckard, you know, has a relationship with Rachel, and they have a child, and that child's the natural born replicant, do you think it's better or worse if he is a replicant? Because there are lines implying both, and they're also undercut, because you have Wallace talking to Deckard, and he says, oh, yes, you were brought in because you were meant to fall for Rachel, so that's implying that Deckard was created. And then he brings in a copy of Rachel, and then Deckard rejects her, implying that he's human. So you have a little bit of both played in there, but what do you think?
So I want to chalk up Wallace's theory to the fact that he's some kind of crazy megalomaniacal person, right? And they kind of prove him wrong, I guess, by showing that the Rachel replicant is incorrect, right? Like, he doesn't quite have all the pieces. If he's right, that seems to me like it would be wildly implausible that they would put Deckard in an extremely dangerous job if he was somehow required to create the only replicant child, right?
That's true, yeah.
I mean, what Wallace seems to be saying is that not only is Rachel extremely important, but then also Deckard, because he's also the only one who could impregnate her, not just any old replicant, and that just seems totally crazy, like why Tyrell would do something so complicated. It doesn't seem like being in that job helps Tyrell in any way.
No.
So I think based only on what you see in this movie, that seems like Wallace is incorrect. Although all the jokes you get about him having something in his eyes or whatever, so that really does seem to push the replicant theory pretty far, I think.
I do love the fact that they don't double down on either side of the theory, which is another great thing, because a lot of sequels would do that. And I'm fairly certain if Ridley Scott completely had his way, there would be a line of Deckard saying, yeah, I know I'm a replicant, or, you know, something like that. And unless Harrison Ford refuses to say it. He is adamant that he is not a replicant. I like the first scene where Agent K, Officer K, goes after a Blade Runner, so it establishes what his job is. It has a visual contrast to the original movie. The original movie, we open on cityscapes. This time we're opening on more rural settings. Also, it should be noted that that was the original opening as written for the original Blade Runner movie, where it was going to be Deckard hunting down a replicant, and he sits down, and the replicant walks in and offers him soup or something, and then they fight, and Deckard ultimately kills him. I guess Denis Villeneuve or Hampton Fancher really liked that opening and brought it into this one, which I think is pretty great. Another detail I really liked, when we see Officer K flying around, we see the two pyramids from the first movie, except all the lights are off. He goes to a much bigger building, which is the Wallace building, and I just love that concept that even as Tyrell Corporation is gone, it's replaced by something just as bad or even worse.
Yeah, my brother who watches with us was mentioning that seems to be the idea that the entire bad corporation from the first movie goes out of business completely, and yet nothing has changed.
Right.
It's kind of also going for the same thing that soldiers seem to be going for, where it's like this structural aspect of society where everything is totally fucked and there's actually nothing you can really do about it because there's no like dragon to slay to make everything right again. Like, you couldn't just kill Tyrell. And even if you did kill Tyrell and his whole corporation went out of business,
there's another one coming up.
Yep. So as far as details, there was a shot in this movie which I was just kind of delighting over in my seat when I saw it, which is the villain replicant who's Wallace's toady. She's trying to murder Kay, and they're having like a strangulation contest, and he's holding her head underwater, and you get a shot from her point of view looking up at him through the water, and it's the bubbles from her breath are breaking against the surface, and so he's really blurry. But the shot holds there for a long time, and he slowly comes into focus. But he's coming into focus because the bubbles are less regularly breaking against the surface because she's running out of breath. So as he's coming into focus, she's dying and running out of breath. I thought that was like...
That's beautiful.
That blew my mind.
Well, I like that character. The character is named Love, so we've got some female characters with very simplistic names. We have Joy and we have Love, and they're both synthetic characters. I really liked her character. She was... I don't want to say just like the ultimate badass because that sounds too simplistic, but she has a lot of great moments that kind of make her an interesting villain. As soon as Deckard rejects the fake Rachel, it's like, well, I'll just shoot her. She shoots her in the head. And there's another part where she has to save Officer K so that he finds the replicant child. She uses like a drone strike to defeat the people who are attacking him, and she says, "All right, get up and do your job," even though she's not really talking directly to him. I love those little moments. She did a great job.
I like the bit where she's threatening the police chief's life, and she says something like, "Oh, I'm just gonna tell Wallace, some lie about how I needed to kill you." And she just seems very clinical and robotic and destructive until she says that. And it almost seems like a little childish, like she's being petty, and then the police chief just has this response, "Well, you gotta do what you gotta do." It's like,
yeah, both of those characters were interesting. I mean, Robin Wright, her interactions with Agent K, I keep saying Agent K, I keep thinking Men in Black, but her interactions with Officer K are very interesting because she seems to have like a real camaraderie with him, even though he is clearly a replicant and she's clearly human. Her little comments like, "You have no soul," etc. And at a certain point in the movie, does it seem like she sort of gives him like a head start or something? I was a little confused on that front where he says, "Oh yeah, I definitely killed the replicant child."
I think she definitely gives him a chance when he fails his, whatever that advanced void comp test
Right,
is.
yeah.
She says that, you're way out of spec or whatever, and I can't prevent them from taking her next test. Or it seems like as soon as he fails that test, he's fucked, but she's kind of letting him go.
Yeah, she's an interesting character, so I appreciate that. And I want to say, from a character standpoint, I like most of the characters in this movie more than the original, at least to a certain degree. Because with the original movie, the character that you really attach to is Roy Batty. All the rest of the characters, they contribute to the movie in certain ways, but they don't stand out as much as he does. Whereas with this movie, I want to say almost every character, you understand their motivations and the way they work. I mean, there are certain details with the original movie that I do love, but I think this movie really amps up the characterization too. I want to say with one exception, I think the Wallace character, maybe some elements of him were underwritten because I don't fully understand why he wants the replicant child, because I get why the other replicants who want to start a rebellion, I get why they want the replicant child. Wallace, I'm not 100% sure why he wants the child. Maybe you have a theory.
I think he makes a comment at some point about how there will be bajillions of replicants in the future, and he kind of sees them as the next stage of humanity. So I think what they're going for there is some kind of Steve Jobs type Silicon Valley character who's like, this is the next big thing in humanity, and like this is the first wave of the future. Like he's kind of obsessed with technological progress for its own sake, perhaps. And he's like, he refers to them as angels and stuff. He's kind of like a Gnostic demiurge or something, kind of just filling the world with his angelic servants or whatever.
Okay. But I would also view it as a contrast to the first movie where the main characterization is among the protagonists and less among the antagonists, whereas with the first movie, the antagonist is the one who's super developed and the main character less so. And I think this movie actually gave Deckard more characterization than he had in the first one, because there were things with his character in the first one where it's kind of his relationship with Rachel was not very well established in the first movie, where he's being really rough with her and then he sleeps with her, but this movie sort of plays it up like, oh, in many ways is sort of the love of his life. It develops his character in a way where it wasn't done as much in the first one. His main character arc in the first one is to understand the humanity in replicants. But here, he's really fleshed out. And I do love his line where I think it's Wallace who tells him, you don't fully understand what you're doing by not revealing the information to me. He says, well, you've never had a kid before. There are lots of bits of dialogue that I really like Joy telling Officer K, well, you're made from 4 different pieces, A, T, C, G, whereas I'm only made from 2, zeros and ones. I like little details like that.
Okay, so I guess I should just mention random associations that I had while watching this movie. One of them is there's a lot of, like I say, environmental obscuring of the background to focus your eye on something. And for large portions of the movie, the background is just kind of orange dust. And there's like these big monolithic ruined buildings. And it really reminded me of paintings by this painter called Beksinski, who makes these, I guess I want to say like hyper dystopian pictures that look like just crazy giant buildings that kind of Giger style might resemble faces or poking out of a void of orange nothingness or whatever. And it really, really reminded me of that. And I wonder if there's any connection there. The more likely connection, which again my brother pointed out to me after we had finished watching this movie, is so one of the shorts is animated, and it's actually directed by the Cowboy Bebop director. We will remember this person from my Animatrix review way back when.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a scene in this movie where somebody brings down Kay's car by shooting a long cable at it and causing some kind of electrical short and making it fall out of the sky. And this exact same thing happens in Cowboy Bebop. The exact same thing. Did he take that from Cowboy Bebop?
It cannot be a coincidence. If he gets this director, if he gets Shinichiro Watanabe to make a short, if I'm talking about Denis Villeneuve, if he gets him to make a short for his movie, and then he takes a thing from something that guy made and puts it into the movie, I really don't think it's a coincidence. Well, one little detail I picked up on, and your brother also pointed out, was when the garbage barges are dropping garbage all over the place. That reminded me of Soldier.
Right.
So it's like, oh, it's all sort of connected in a way.
Exactly.
So I don't know how deliberate that was, but that was great. That was great. I think the ultimate message, I guess, of the movie is what gives Officer K his humanity is the fact that he was willing to kind of go to bat for Deckard in the end. He knows that killing Deckard would ultimately be a good thing because if the bad guys were to find Deckard, he would be able to reveal where the rebellion is, and then they would ultimately find the replicant child. But what makes Officer K human is that he goes out of his way to fake Deckard's death, give him a chance to see his daughter. As Officer K dies, they play the music from the first movie, so it's just like this ultimate triumphant moment.
I don't know, even kind of bittersweet, because that's twice in a row where the replicant is the one that has some kind of human kindness toward Deckard, and he's the one who develops and like they die. So I don't know, it's just nice and subtle and good. It's not he leaves an army of replicants and furiously reproduces with them to make they all go up to the Wallace Corporation and punch him to death.
I've looked at some other reviews online. One review in particular kind of bothered me where she said, oh, this was a great movie until the last third of the movie because we had this whole promise of a replicant rebellion and we didn't get that. It seems just like set up for another movie. And no, I wasn't getting that at all. No, it's like the movie isn't about that. It's a very, very personal story. The idea in the Blade Runner universe is established in the first one and continuing on with this one is that nothing really changes. And that's the ultimate tragic thing. You mentioned it as bittersweet because, well, Deckard does get his resolution, but here's the replicant sacrificing himself for a human, and it's continuation of what's constantly happening is the replicants are the ones kind of giving of themselves for the sake of the humanity. But in the case of Officer K, where his resolution comes in, is that it was his choice to do it. The thing is, the overall society still remains the same. Once again, your brother mentioning that Wallace just being yet another Tyrell, even if the Tyrell Corporation is gone, Even if there is a replicant rebellion, who knows what's really going to happen, and it's not really important to the themes of the story.
Right. You can easily imagine the world of Blade Runner having a replicant rebellion and ending up still being the same world. Like, so now instead of people leading these kind of dissociated, incoherent lives amidst these monolithic corporate buildings, it's replicants doing all those things, right? And maybe they can like run fast or something, but that doesn't solve their life problems.
All right, time for the big question now. Which do you think is a better movie, this or the original?
You know, I'm very tempted to say the new one is actually better. When I think of how good the first movie was, I tend to focus on particular moments, like the final Roy Batty speech at the end. But I feel like this movie doesn't quite have that, but it's so consistent in other ways, in its tone and pacing and its ultimate coherence, I guess. I mean, like, there's some things in the first movie where, like, did Deckard rape Rachel? And is that even intended to be a commentary on the way replicants are treated in society? Or even though that does fit the themes of the movie, whether it's really intentional or it's just like tone deafness or
Right.
like it just, maybe that's just my unsophistication as a film viewer. But yeah, I don't know. This is a tough one for me.
I'm also inclined to say that this movie is the better movie because I love Ridley Scott. He's a great atmospheric and visual director, and there are a lot of elements of humanity in the original movie, but human interaction and development of character is at certain points Ridley Scott's weakness. He's great at building atmosphere, he's great at building tension, but some of the human element is lost. I suppose the exception would be the first Alien movie, but that came about because he let the actors kind of improv their way through, and their natural interactions is what we see in the movie. Whereas with this movie, I do get the distinct feeling from Denis Villeneuve that he does have a very coherent understanding of what drives characterization. And you can chalk up the lack of chemistry between Deckard and Rachel in the first movie to either the directing or the fact that the actors didn't get along. But it's up to the director to really buckle down and convey what's trying to be conveyed. And I was also slightly confused. It's like, well, was Deckard trying to rape Rachel, or is this like a real romantic moment and she's sort of pushing back because she thinks that's what she should do? As far as the themes in this movie, it's taking elements that were, I suppose, more subtly conveyed in the first movie and just really employing them as the driving elements of the plot. It's like the perfect sequel to the first movie. If you enjoyed the first movie, this is a perfect follow-up to that. Well, those are our thoughts on both Soldier and Blade Runner 2049. We are the Movie Meisters saying,
Cinema is not a slice of life, but a piece of cake.
Thanks for watching.